Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly, and to the close of Book 1. I am Pembroke and this is Part 7. Now the schemer is caught in his own web of the death of Herod's brother Pheroras opens a trail of poison that leads straight to Antipater, who is convicted out of his own household and tried before the Roman governor Varus. And as Herod himself rots toward death in dreadful pain, he commits the last and most infamous cruelties of his reign, the burning of the rabbis who pulled down the golden eagle from the temple gate, and a plan so monstrous that even Josephus can scarcely tell it. Then, at last, the old king dies. Let us finish the book.
Now the punishment was transferred to the original author, Antipater, and it began with the death of Pheroras. Certain freedmen of Pheroras came to the king with sad faces and told him that his brother had been destroyed by poison. They said Pheroras' wife had brought him something prepared in an unusual way, and that as soon as he ate it, he fell into his illness. They also said that 2 days earlier Antipater's mother and sister had brought a woman out of Arabia who was skilled in mixing such drugs, so that she might prepare a love potion for Pheroras. Instead of a love potion, she had given him deadly poison, and this had been managed by Silius, who knew that woman. The king was deeply affected by so many suspicions, and he had the maidservants and some of the free women tortured. One of them cried out in her agonies, "May the God who governs the earth and heaven punish the author of all these miseries of ours, Antipater's mother." The king took hold of this confession and proceeded to inquire further into the truth of the matter. So this woman revealed the friendship between Antipater's mother and Pheroras, and Antipater's women, as well as their secret meetings. She said that Pheroras and Antipater had drunk with them for a whole night after returning from the king, and would not allow anyone, either male servant or female servant, to be there. One of the free women revealed this matter. After this Herod tortured the maidservants separately, one by one. They all unanimously agreed in the earlier discoveries, and said that by agreement Antipater went away to Rome and Pheroras to Perea. They said the two often spoke to each other in this way. After Herod had killed Alexander and Aristobulus, he would fall on them and on their wives, because after he had killed Mariamne and her children, he would spare nobody. For this reason it was best to get as far away from the wild beast as they could. They also said that Antipater often lamented his own case before his mother, telling her that he already had gray hairs on his head, while his father grew younger every day, and that perhaps death would overtake him before he began to be king in earnest. Even if Herod should die, though no one knew when that would be, the enjoyment of the succession could certainly be only for a little time, because those heads of Hydra, the sons of Alexander and Aristobulus, were growing up. Antipater said his father had deprived him of the hope of being succeeded by his own children, since after his death his successor was not to be one of his own sons, but Herod, the son of Mariamne. In this point, he said, Herod was plainly distracted if he thought his testament would take effect, for Antipater would take care that not one of Herod's posterity remained, because Herod was of all fathers the greatest hater of his children. Yet he hated his brother still worse, which was why a little while ago he gave Antipater 100 talents, so that he would have no intercourse with Pheroras. And what have we done him any harm? I wish he would only deprive us of all we have and leave us naked and alive. But it is impossible to escape this wild beast, who is so given to murder, and who will not allow us to love anyone openly, although we are together privately. Yet we may be together openly too if we only have the courage and the hands of men. These things were said by the women under torture, along with the statement that Pheroras had resolved to flee with them to Perea. Herod believed all they said because of the matter of the 100 talents, for he had spoken of them with no one except Antipater. So he first vented his anger against Antipater's mother. He took away from her all the ornaments he had given her, which had cost many talents, and cast her out of the palace a second time. He also took care of Pheroras' women after their tortures, since he was now reconciled to them. But he himself was in great consternation and inflamed at every suspicion. Out of fear that he might leave any guilty person untortured, he had many innocent persons led to torture. He then turned to examine Antipater of Samaria, who was the steward of his son Antipater. By torturing him, Herod learned that Antipater had sent to Egypt for a deadly poison for him through Antipater, one of his companions. Theudeo, Antipater's uncle, had received it from Antipater and delivered it to Pheroras, because Antipater had charged him to remove his father while he was at Rome, and so free him from the suspicion of doing it himself. Pheroras then entrusted this potion to his wife. The king sent for her, and ordered her to bring him immediately what she had received. She came out of her house as if she were going to bring it, but threw herself down from the top of the house in order to prevent examination and torture from the king. Yet it happened, as it seems by God's providence, when he intended to bring Antipater to punishment, that she did not fall on her head, but on other parts of her body, and survived. When she was brought to him, the king took care of her, since at first she was senseless from the fall. He asked why she had thrown herself down and swore to her that if she would speak the real truth, he would excuse her from punishment, but if she concealed anything, he would have her body torn to pieces by torments and leave no part of it for burial. At this the woman paused a little and then said, "Why should I spare speaking of these great secrets now that Pheroras is dead? That would only save Antipater, who is the destruction of us all. Hear then, O king, and let both you and God himself, who cannot be deceived, be witnesses to the truth of what I am about to say. When you sat weeping by Pheroras as he was dying, he called me to him and said, My dear wife, I have been greatly mistaken about my brother's disposition toward me. I have hated the man who is so affectionate to me, and I have contrived to kill the man who is in such distress for me before I am dead. As for myself, I receive the recompense of my impiety. But bring the poison that Antipater left with us, which you keep in order to destroy him, and immediately burn it in the fire before my eyes, so that I may not be liable to the avenger in the invisible world. I brought it as he ordered me and emptied the greater part of it into the fire, but I kept a little of it for my own use against uncertain future events and out of my fear of you. When she had said this, she brought the box which had a small quantity of the potion in it. The king let her alone and transferred the tortures to Antiphalus's mother and brother. They both confessed that Antipater had brought the box from Egypt, and that they had received the potion from a brother of his, who was a physician at Alexandria. Then the ghosts of Alexander and Aristobulus seemed to go through the whole palace, becoming the investigators and discoverers of what could not otherwise have been found out, and bringing to examination even those who were freest from suspicion. By this it was discovered that Mariamne, the high priest's daughter, knew of this plot, and her own brothers, when tortured, declared that it was so. Thereupon the king avenged this insolent attempt of the mother upon her son, and blotted Herod, whom he had by her, out of his testament, though he had previously been named in it as successor to Antipater. After these things were finished, Bathyllus was examined in order to convict Antipater, and he proved to be the final witness to Antipater's designs. He was, in fact, Antipater's own freedman. This man came and brought another deadly potion, the poison of asps and the juices of other serpents, so that if the first potion did not accomplish the task, Pheroras and his wife might also be armed with this to destroy the king. He also brought, in addition to Antipater's insolent attempt against his father, the letters Antipater had written against his brothers Archelaus and Philip. These were the king's sons, still young, educated at Rome, and of generous dispositions. Antipater set himself to get rid of them as quickly as he could, so that they might not harm his hopes. To that end he forged letters against them in the names of his friends at Rome. Some of those friends he bribed to write that the young men grossly reproached their father, openly lamented Alexander and Aristobulus, and were uneasy about being recalled, for their father had already sent for them, which was exactly what troubled Antipater. Indeed, while Antipater was still in Judea and before he began his journey to Rome, he had paid money so that similar letters against them would be sent from Rome. Then he came to his father, who as yet had no suspicion of him, and apologized for his brothers, alleging on their behalf that some things in those letters were false and that others were only youthful errors. At the same time, while he spent a great deal of money making presents to those who wrote against his brothers, he tried to confuse his accounts by buying costly garments, carpets of various weavings, silver and gold cups, and many other curious things. In this way, among the very great expenses laid out for such furnishings, he could conceal the money he had used to hire men to write the letters. He brought in an account of his expenses amounting to 200 talents, his main pretense being the lawsuit he had been engaged in with Silius. Thus all his rogueries, even the lesser ones, were covered by his greater villainy. All the examinations by torture proclaimed his attempt to murder his father, and the letters proclaimed his second attempt to murder his brothers. Yet none of those who came to Rome informed him of his misfortunes in Judea, although 7 months had passed between his conviction and his return, so great was the hatred they all bore him. Perhaps the ghosts of the brothers he had murdered stopped the mouths of those who intended to tell him. He then wrote from Rome and informed his friends that he would soon come to them, and that Caesar had dismissed him with honor. The king, wanting to get this plotter against him into his hands, and also fearing that Antipater might somehow learn how matters stood and be on his guard, concealed his anger in his letter to him. As in other respects he wrote kindly, he urged him to hurry, because if he came quickly, Herod would lay aside the complaints he had against his mother. Antipater was not ignorant that his mother had been expelled from the palace. However, he had already received at Tarentum a letter containing an account of Pheroras' death, and he made great lamentations over it. Some praised him for this, as though it was for his uncle, though probably his confusion arose because the plot against his father's life had failed by this death. His tears were more for the loss of the man who was to have served in that plot than for Pheroras as an uncle. Moreover, a kind of fear came upon him concerning his designs, lest the poison had been discovered. When Antipater was in Cilicia, he received the earlier mentioned letter from his father and hurried accordingly. But when he sailed to Celenderis, a suspicion entered his mind concerning his mother's misfortunes, as though his soul foreboded some harm to itself. Therefore, the most considerate of his friends advised him not to go rashly to his father until he had learned the reasons why his mother had been expelled. They feared he might be involved in the slanders cast upon her. But those who were less considerate, and cared more about their own desire to see their native country than about Antipater's safety, persuaded him to hurry home. They told him not to delay his journey, and thereby give his father grounds for bad suspicion, or provide a handle to those who raised stories against him. If anything had been moved to his disadvantage, they said, it was because of his absence, and no one would have dared do it had he been present. They said it was absurd to deprive himself of certain happiness for the sake of an uncertain suspicion, and that he should rather return to his father and take upon himself the royal authority, which was in a state of uncertainty only because of him. Antipater followed this last advice, for Providence hurried him on to his destruction. So he crossed the sea and landed at Sebastus, the harbor of Caesarea. There he found a complete and unexpected solitude. Everyone avoided him, and no one dared come near him. He was equally hated by all men, and now that hatred had freed him to show itself, while the fear men had of the king's anger kept them away from him. The whole city of Jerusalem was filled with rumors about Antipater, and Antipater himself was the only person ignorant of them. No man had been dismissed more magnificently when he began his voyage to Rome, and no man was now received back with greater disgrace. He had already begun to suspect the misfortunes in Herod's family, yet he cunningly concealed his suspicion. Although inwardly he was ready to die from fear, he put on a forced boldness of countenance. He could no longer flee anywhere, nor did he have any way to emerge from the difficulties surrounding him. Nor did he even there have any certain knowledge of the affairs of the royal family, because of the threats the king had given out. Still, he had some small hopes of better news. Perhaps nothing had been discovered, or if something had been discovered, perhaps he would be able to clear himself by impudence and crafty tricks, which were the only things on which he relied for deliverance. With these hopes he shielded himself until he came to the palace, without any friends with him, for they had been insulted and shut out at the first gate. Varus, the president of Syria, happened to be in the palace at that time. So Antipater went into his father, and putting on a bold face, came near to salute him. Even this is a sign of a parricide, to want to take me in his arms while he is under such terrible accusations. May God confound you, vile wretch. Do not touch me until you have cleared yourself of these crimes charged against you. I appoint a court where you are to be judged, and Varus, who is here at a very convenient time, to be your judge. Prepare your defense by tomorrow, for I give you that much time to prepare suitable excuses for yourself. Antipater was so confounded that he could make no answer to this charge, and he went away. But his mother and wife came to him and told him of all the evidence gathered against him. At this he recovered himself and considered what defense he should make against the accusations. The next day the king assembled a court of his relatives and friends, and also called in Antipater's friends. Herod himself and Varus presided. Herod called for all the witnesses, and ordered them to be brought in. Among them were some of the household servants of Antipater's mother, who had only a little while before been caught carrying this letter from her to her son. Since all these things have already been discovered to your father, do not come to him unless you can procure some assistance from Caesar. When this letter and the other witnesses had been introduced, Antipater came in, fell on his face before his father's feet, and spoke. Father, I beg you, do not condemn me beforehand, but let your ears be unbiased and listen to my defense. If you will give me leave, I will demonstrate that I am innocent. I cannot help thinking, Varus, that you and every other upright judge will determine that Antipater is a vile wretch. I am also afraid that you will abhor my ill fortune and judge me myself worthy of every sort of calamity for begetting such children. Yet I ought rather to be pitied, for I have been such an affectionate father to such wretched sons. When I had settled the kingdom on my former sons, even while they were young, and when, besides the cost of their education at Rome, I had made them friends of Caesar and made them envied by other kings, I found them plotting against me. They were put to death, and in great measure for Antipater's sake. Since he was then young and appointed to be my successor, I chiefly took care to secure him from danger. But this profligate wild beast, after being more than satisfied with the patience I showed him, used the abundance I had given him against me. It seemed to him that I lived too long, and he was very uneasy at the old age I had reached. He could not wait any longer, but wanted to be king by parricide. I am justly served by him for bringing him back from the country to court, when he was of no esteem before, for thrusting out those sons of mine who were born of the queen, and for making him successor to my dominions. I confess to you, Varus, the great folly of which I was guilty. I provoked those sons of mine to act against me and cut off their just expectations for the sake of Antipater. And indeed what kindness did I ever do them that could equal what I have done for Antipater? I have in a manner yielded up my royal authority to him while I am still alive. I have openly named him in my testament as successor to my dominions, given him a yearly revenue of his own of 50 talents, and supplied him extravagantly with money from my own revenues. When he was about to sail to Rome, I gave him 300 talents and recommended him alone of all my children, to Caesar as his father's deliverer. What crimes were my other sons guilty of that were like these crimes of Antipater? What evidence was brought against them so strong as this evidence demonstrating that this son has plotted against me? Yet this parricide presumes to speak for himself and hopes to obscure the truth by his cunning tricks. You, Varus, must guard yourself against him. I know the wild beast, and I foresee how plausibly he will speak, and how counterfeit his lamentation will be. This was the man who exhorted me to beware of Alexander while he was alive, and not to trust my body with all men. This was the man who came to my very bed, and looked around lest anyone should lay snares for me. This was the man who took care of my sleep and secured me from fear of danger, who comforted me under the trouble I suffered after the slaughter of my sons, and watched to see what affection my surviving brothers bore me. This was my protector and the guardian of my body. And when I remember, Varus, his craftiness on every occasion and his art of dissembling, I can hardly believe that I am still alive, and I wonder how I escaped so deep a plotter of mischief. However, since some fate or other makes my house desolate and continually raises up those dearest to me against me, I will lament my hard fortune with tears and privately groan under my lonely condition. Yet I am resolved that no one who thirsts for my blood shall escape punishment, even if the evidence should extend to all my sons." As Herod said this, he was interrupted by the confusion he was in, but he ordered Nicolaus, one of his friends, to present the evidence against Antipater. Meanwhile Antipater lifted up his head, for he was lying on the ground before his father's feet, and cried aloud, "You, father, have made my apology for me. How can I be a parricide, when you yourself confess that you have always had me as your guardian? You call my filial affection prodigious lies and hypocrisy. How then could I, who was so subtle in other matters, be so mad in this case as not to understand that it was not easy for someone who committed so horrible a crime to remain hidden from men, and impossible for him to remain hidden from the Judge of heaven, who sees all things and is present everywhere? Did I not know what end my brothers came to, on whom God inflicted so great a punishment for their evil designs against you? Indeed, what could possibly provoke me against you? Could the hope of being king do it? I was already a king. Could I suspect hatred from you? No. Was I not loved by you? What other fear could I have? No, by keeping you safe I was a terror to others. Did I lack money? No, for who was able to spend as much as I was? Indeed, father, if I had been the most detestable of all mankind, and if I had the soul of the cruelest wild beast, must I not have been overcome by the benefits you bestowed on me? You yourself say that you brought me into the palace, preferred me before so many of your sons, made me a king in your own lifetime, and by the vast greatness of the other advantages you bestowed on me, made me an object of envy. O miserable man that I am, that I should undergo this bitter absence, and thereby give a great opportunity for envy to rise against me, and a long space of time for those laying designs against me. Yet I was absent, father, on your affairs, so that Silius might not treat you with contempt in your old age. Rome is a witness to my filial affection, and so is Caesar, the ruler of the inhabited earth, who often called me Philopater. Take here the letters he has sent you. They are more worthy of belief than the slanders raised here. These letters are my only apology. These I use as the proof of the natural affection I have for you. Remember that it was against my own choice that I sailed to Rome, because I knew the hidden hatred against me in the kingdom. It was you, father, however unwillingly, who have been my ruin, by forcing me to allow time for slanders and envy against me. Still I have come here and am ready to hear the evidence against me. If I am a parricide, I have passed by land and sea without suffering any misfortune on either. But this manner of trial is no advantage to me. It seems, father, that I am already condemned both before God and before you. Since I am already condemned, I beg you not to believe the others who have been tortured. Instead, let fire be brought to torment me. Let the racks pass through my bowels. Have no regard for any lamentations this polluted body may make. If I am a parricide, I ought not to die without torture. Thus Antipater cried out with lamentation and weeping, and he moved all the rest, especially Varus, to pity his case. Herod was the only person whose passion was too strong to allow him to weep, because he knew that the testimonies against Antipater were true. At the king's command, Nicolaus then spoke. He first said a great deal about Antipater's craftiness, and prevented the effect of their pity for him. Afterward he brought in a bitter and extensive accusation against him, ascribing to him all the wickedness that had been in the kingdom, and especially the murder of his brothers. He demonstrated that they had perished through the slanders Antipater had raised against them. He also said that Antipater had laid designs against the brothers who were still alive, as though they were plotting for the succession. He asked how it could be supposed that the man who prepared poison for his father would abstain from mischief against his brothers. He then proceeded to convict him of the attempt to poison Herod, and gave an orderly account of the several discoveries that had been made. He expressed great indignation over the affair of Pheroras, because Antipater had tried to make him murder his brother, had corrupted those dearest to the king, and had filled the whole palace with wickedness. After insisting on many other accusations and their proofs, he stopped. Then Varus ordered Antipater to make his defense. But Antipater lay there in silence and said nothing more than, "God is my witness that I am entirely innocent." So Varus asked for the potion, and ordered it to be given to a condemned criminal who was then in prison. The man drank it and died on the spot. After Varus had a very private conversation with Herod and wrote an account of this assembly to Caesar, he went away after staying one day. The king also bound Antipater, and sent to inform Caesar of his misfortunes. After this it was discovered that Antipater had also laid a plot against Salome. One of Antiphilus's household servants came and brought letters from Rome, from a maidservant of Julia, Caesar's wife, whose name was Acme. Through her a message was sent to the king, saying that she had found a letter written by Salome among Julia's papers, and had sent it privately to him out of goodwill toward him. This letter of Salome contained the most bitter reproaches against the king, and the highest accusations against him. Antipater had forged this letter, corrupted Acme, and persuaded her to send it to Herod. This was proved by her letter to Antipater, for the woman wrote to him, "As you desired, I have written a letter to your father, and have sent that letter. I am persuaded that the king will not spare his sister when he reads it. You will do well to remember what you promised when all is accomplished." When this letter was discovered, along with the contents of the letter forged against Salome, a suspicion entered the king's mind that perhaps the letters against Alexander had also been forged. He was also greatly disturbed and in a passion, because he had almost killed his sister on Antipater's account. Therefore, he no longer delayed bringing Antipater to punishment for all his crimes. Yet while he was eagerly pursuing Antipater, he was restrained by a severe illness that fell upon him. However, he sent Caesar an account of Acme and the contrivances against Salome. He also sent for his testament and altered it. In it he made Antipas king, taking no care of Archelaus and Philip because Antipater had ruined their reputations with him. He bequeathed to Caesar, besides other presents he gave him, 1,000 talents, and to Caesar's wife, children, friends, and freedmen he bequeathed about 500. He also bequeathed to all others a great quantity of land and money, and showed his respect for his sister Salome by giving her most splendid gifts. This was what was contained in his testament as it was now altered. Herod's illness became more and more severe, because these disorders fell on him in his old age, and when he was in a melancholy condition. He was already 70 years old and had been worn down by the calamities that had happened to him concerning his children, so that he had no pleasure in life even when he was healthy. The grief that Antipater was still alive also made his disease worse. He resolved to put him to death, not at random, but as soon as he was well again, and to have him killed publicly. Among his other calamities, a certain popular sedition now happened. There were 2 learned men in Jerusalem, who were thought the most skillful in the laws of their country, and for that reason were held in very great esteem throughout the nation. One was Judas, the son of Sepphoris, and the other Matthias, the son of Margalus. A great crowd of young men came to them when they explained the laws, and every day there gathered around them something like an army of men growing into adulthood. When these teachers were informed that the king was wasting away from melancholy and disease, they suggested to their acquaintances that now was a very proper time to defend the cause of God, and to pull down what had been set up contrary to the laws of their country. For it was unlawful for anything in the temple to be images, faces, or any similar representation of any living creature. The king had set up a golden eagle over the great gate of the temple, and these learned men urged the young men to cut it down. They told them that if danger arose, it was glorious to die for the laws of their country, because the soul is immortal and an eternal enjoyment of happiness awaits those who die for that cause. Meanwhile, the mean, spirited, and those not wise enough to show a proper love for their souls, preferred death by disease to death that results from virtuous behavior. At the same time that these men made this speech to their disciples, a rumor spread that the king was dying. This made the young men begin the work with greater boldness. Therefore, at midday, while a great number of people were in the temple, they let themselves down from the top of the temple with thick cords and cut down the golden eagle with axes. This was immediately reported to the king's captain of the temple. He came running with a large body of soldiers, caught about 40 of the young men, and brought them to the king. When Herod first asked whether they had been so bold as to cut down the golden eagle, they confessed that they had done it. When he asked by whose command they had done it, they answered, at the command of the law of their country. When he further asked how they could be so joyful when they were to be put to death, they replied that they would enjoy greater happiness after they were dead. At this the king fell into such an extravagant passion that, for the moment, he overcame his disease, went out, and spoke to the people. He made a terrible accusation against those men, charging them with sacrilege and with making greater attempts under the pretense of their law, and he thought they deserved to be punished as impious persons. People were afraid that a great number would be found guilty, and they asked that after he had first punished those who had put them up to this work, and then those who had been caught in it, he would let his anger toward the rest cease. The king complied with this, though not without difficulty. He ordered those who had let themselves down, together with their rabbins, to be burned alive, but delivered the rest who had been caught to the proper officers to be put to death by them. After this, the disease seized his whole body and greatly disordered all its parts with various symptoms. He had a mild fever, an intolerable itching over the whole surface of his body, continual pains in his dropsical tumors around his feet, inflammation of the abdomen, and a putrefaction of his private member that produced worms. Besides this, he had difficulty breathing and could breathe only while sitting upright, and he suffered convulsions in all his limbs. The diviners said these diseases were a punishment on him for what he had done to the rabbins. Yet he struggled with his many disorders, still desired to live, hoped for recovery, and considered several methods of cure. Accordingly, he crossed Jordan and used the hot baths at Calero, which flow into the lake Asphaltites, though they themselves are sweet enough to drink. There the physicians thought it proper to bathe his whole body in warm oil, by lowering him into a large vessel full of oil. At this his eyes failed, and he seemed to be dying. A tumult then arose among his servants, and at the sound of their voices he revived. After this he despaired of recovery and ordered that each soldier should receive 50 drachmae, and that great sums of money should be given to his commanders and friends. He then returned and came to Jericho in such a melancholy condition of body that it almost threatened immediate death. Then he proceeded to attempt a horrible wickedness. He gathered the most illustrious men of the whole Jewish nation from every village into a place called the Hippodrome, and shut them in there. Then he called for his sister Salome and her husband Alexis, and spoke to them. "I know well enough that the Jews will keep a festival upon my death. However, it is in my power to be mourned for on other accounts, and to have a splendid funeral, if you will only obey my commands. Take care to send soldiers to surround these men now in custody, and kill them immediately upon my death. Then all Judea, and every family in it, will weep whether they want to or not." These were the commands he gave them. Then letters arrived from his ambassadors at Rome, giving information that Acme had been put to death by Caesar's command, and that Antipater was condemned to die. They also wrote that if Herod preferred to banish him, Caesar allowed him to do so. For a little while Herod revived and desired to live, but soon afterward he was overcome by his pains, disordered by lack of food and a convulsive cough, and tried to prevent a natural death. He took an apple and asked for a knife, since he used to pare apples and eat them. Then he looked around to see that there was no one to hinder him, and lifted his right hand as if to stab himself. But Agabus, his first cousin, ran to him, held his hand, and stopped him. At this a very great lamentation arose in the palace, as if the king were expiring. As soon as Antipater heard it, he took courage, and with joy in his face, begged his keepers for money to loose him and let him go. But the chief keeper of the prison not only prevented him from doing this, but ran and told the king of his design. At this the king cried out louder than his illness could well bear, and immediately sent some of his guards, who killed Antipater. He also ordered him to be buried at Hyrcanium. Then he altered his testament again, making Archelaus, his eldest son and the brother of Antipas, his successor, and making Antipas tetrarch. So Herod survived the slaughter of his son for 5 days, and then died. He had reigned 34 years since he caused Antigonus to be killed and obtained his kingdom, and 37 years since he had been made king by the Romans. As for his fortune, it was prosperous in every other respect, if any man's could ever be so, since from a private man he obtained the kingdom, kept it so long, and left it to his own sons. Yet in his domestic affairs he was a most unfortunate man. Before the soldiers knew of his death, Salome and her husband came out and released those who were in bonds, whom the king had commanded to be killed. They told them that he had changed his mind, and wanted each of them sent to his own home. When these men were gone, Salome told the soldiers that the king was dead, and gathered them, along with the rest of the multitude, into an assembly in the amphitheater at Jericho. There Ptolemy, who had been entrusted by the king with his signet ring, came before them, spoke of the happiness the king had attained, comforted the multitude, and read the letter left for the soldiers, in which Herod earnestly exhorted them to bear goodwill toward his successor. After reading the letter, Ptolemy opened and read the testament. In it Philip was to inherit Trachonitis and the neighboring countries, Antipas was to be tetrarch as said before, and Archelaus was made king. Ptolemy had also been commanded to carry Herod's ring to Caesar, along with the settlements he had made, sealed up, because Caesar was to be lord of all the arrangements he had made, and was to confirm his testament. Herod also ordered that the dispositions he had made were to be kept as they were in his former testament. Then an acclamation was made to Archelaus to congratulate him on his advancement. The soldiers and the multitude went around in troops, promised him their goodwill, and also prayed God to bless his government. After this they turned to preparing the king's funeral. Archelaus omitted nothing of magnificence, but brought out all the royal ornaments to increase the pomp of the deceased. There was a bier entirely of gold, embroidered with precious stones, and a purple bed of varied workmanship, with the dead body lying on it covered in purple. A diadem was placed on his head, with a crown of gold above it, and a scepter was put in his right hand. Near the bier were Herod's sons, and a multitude of his relatives. Next came his guards, the regiment of Thracians, and also the Germans and Gauls, all arranged as if they were going to war. The rest of the army went in front, armed and following their captains and officers in regular order. After them came 500 of his household servants and freedmen, carrying sweet spices in their hands. The body was carried 200 furlongs to Herodium, where he had ordered that he be buried. This is enough for the conclusion of Herod's life.
And their book 1 ends, with Herod the Great dead, his kingdom soaked in the blood of his own family, and his surviving sons already quarreling over the inheritance. But the death of Herod does not bring peace, it brings the procurators, the riots, and the long slide toward the Great War. In Book 2, Josephus carries us down that road. Thank you for sitting with the whole of Book 1. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.